Hi, my name is Christy Jaquel and I'm a speech pathology student at Kingaroy Hospital. Today we're going to learn some strategies from a speech pathology background that you can use within the early learning setting to help develop your students' communication. What is speech pathology? Speech pathologists study, diagnose and treat communication disorders, including difficulties of speaking, listening, understanding language, reading, writing, social skills, stuttering and using voice. We work with people who have difficulty communicating because of developmental delays, stroke, brain injuries, learning disability, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, dementia and hearing loss, as well as other problems that can affect speech and language. People who experience difficulty swallowing food and drink safely can also be helped by a speech pathologist. As early childhood educators, you're in one of the most important positions for setting up the future generation of children for success. Today, we'll be going through some information, practical tips and strategies to help support children's communication within the early learning setting. First, we'll talk about what communication is and why it's important, what typical communication development looks like, what can happen when a child has difficulty with speech and language, strategies for supporting language in an early childhood setting, strategies for supporting language whilst reading books, strategies to support speech difficulties, and when to refer a child to your director if you suspect they're having difficulties. First of all, let's talk about what communication is. Communication is giving and receiving of information and ideas. It involves both understanding and expression. Forms of expression can include movements, gestures, objects, making sounds, saying words, signs, pictures, symbols, printed words, and output from communication devices. Speech is the use of sounds to make words. A child with a speech disorder has problems putting together sounds to make words. Language development is the use of words to put together thoughts. Children with language disorders have problems putting thoughts together and have trouble understanding what's being said to them. The bottom line is, when individuals communicate well, they're able to express their needs, wants, feelings, and preferences, and also understand language around them to make sense of their world, whether that's spoken language, written language, or gesture. Let's have a look at what typical speech and language development looks like. Infants begin to cry at the time of birth, as they take in their first breath of air, and then later to show that they're hungry or have discomfort. Before 3 months of age, infants begin to react to familiar faces and coo back and forth in pre-speech. Around this time, an infant may develop a different sound, such as a squeal, that gets reactions from others. Around 3 months of age, the child begins to babble by making consonant and vowel sounds, gestures, and say a few words. They should be able to understand about 10 words and respond to their name. At 2 years old, children should be using around 50 recognisable words and be starting to put 2 or more words together to form simple sentences. They should also be able to follow simple, 2-part instructions. At about 3 years old, children's vocabulary is growing much bigger, and they're asking many questions starting with what, where, and who. They should also be able to sort items into simple categories, have a conversation but may not take turns or stay on topic, and say 4 to 5 words in a sentence. At 4 years old, a child should be able to describe recent events, like what they did that morning, and they should also tell stories. They should also be asking lots of questions and answer most questions about daily tasks. At 5 years old, children should be taking turns in longer conversations, they should be telling short stories with a beginning, middle, and end, and they should be following 3-part instructions. They should start to recognise some letters, sounds, and numbers, and they should enjoy singing rhymes and songs. So why is supporting communication important? Children with early speech and language difficulties are at risk of poor academic achievement throughout childhood. These difficulties are often only recognised when a child enters an early education setting or when they start school. These difficulties in early spoken language skills are strongly related to later reading, literacy, and communication difficulties at school, as a teenager, and difficulties as adults. Language stimulation, which is a term for encouraging language, is very important in early language development. By changing a child's environment, the way they learn language can be improved. This will ensure a stronger foundation for more higher level language learning in later years. One thing that can be done to help is to stimulate language during play using a range of strategies. Children who are exposed to a lot of language that includes a variety of words and sentences tend to have stronger language skills, since this provides them with more opportunities to find the patterns in the language that they hear. Children who have difficulties with language might need more time hearing language to learn how to use it. Here are some things that you can try. Allow the child to lead the interaction. As adults, when we want to talk, it's usually when we're interested in the topic or something that catches our attention in the moment. It's the same for children. They're most likely to communicate about something that they're excited about or interested in. By letting the child lead the interaction, it'll also mean that they're more motivated to communicate with you and stay longer in the interaction. The longer that they are in that interaction, the more opportunities for learning and hearing language there will be. Some strategies that you can try include self-talk, parallel talk, expansions, and recast sentences. Let's have a look at those a little closer. Self-talk is when you talk about what you're doing for the child's benefit. It provides an example to the child of speaking while not asking for them to respond. It provides the child with lots of exposure to language used in a particular setting. For example, you could say, "I'm getting a spoon out of the drawer. I'm stirring the soup's in a saucepan. I'm getting out 2 plates, I'm pouring the soup into 2 bowls, and we sit at the table." Just in this interaction, the child has heard a large amount of new words, all in relation to making dinner. This can be done in a play activity or while you're completing tasks around the classroom. This can be useful for children who aren't using words yet or aren't interacting much with you. The next strategy is parallel talk. Parallel talk is when you talk about what your child is doing, so you're adding words to what they're doing. Don't change how they're playing, but talk about what they're playing with. You can use simple sentences to talk about the child's actions. For example, you could say, "You have a red truck. You're driving the truck. It drives past some trees. It stops. It turns the corner. Now you have a plane. It flies in the air. There's people in it. Oh no, one fell out." Again, you can see that the child is hearing all of these new words, but they're in relation to what the child is doing. It's as if you're giving them the words that they need but are not using yet. The next strategy is called expansions. Expansions are repeating what the child has said but adding the appropriate grammar. For example, if the child says, "Baby, sleep," when they're putting a doll into a cot, you could say, "The baby is sleeping," or "You put the baby to sleep," or "The baby is asleep." Because what you've said is very similar to what the child has tried to say, it'll be easy for them to understand what you've said and try to use the correct grammar in the future. What you're doing is you're providing the building blocks of the sentence for them. Another strategy you can use in these interactions is called recast sentences. This involves changing the format of what the child has said so that they can learn how to say that word in a lot of different sentence types. So if the child makes a comment, you could change it into a question. For example, if the child says, "Dolly's sick," you could say, "Is she sick?" You've changed the comment into a question. If the child says, "The cat is eating the food," you could say, "The food is being eaten by the cat." Once again, this is giving your child new language to be exposed to and different ways to make sentences around that language. Here's another strategy. Use words and sentences just slightly above the child's level. If you're using language one small step ahead of the child's level, you can give the child an example of how to move to the next level of language development. To do this, you need to know how the child is already communicating. For example, this could be by looking at you, or they could be making sounds. They could be using gestures like reaching for things, pointing and waving. They could be using single words one at a time. They could have started combining words together, or they could be using sentences. So wherever they are on this scale, try to give them examples of what the next step looks like. For example, if the child is using communication without words by looking, making sounds or gestures, you could use language that's one small step ahead of them by using short and simple sentences. For example, a child could wave to their parent when they're leaving the centre, and you could say, "Yeah, Daddy's going," or "Bye, Daddy." If the child is using words or combining words into short sentences, you could be one step ahead of them by speaking in sentences that are slightly longer than the child's sentence. For example, if the child says "ball," you could say, "It's a big ball." Another strategy is repeating key words during different activities. Using the same word in lots of different activities gives the child more information about how to use the word in different ways. Here's an example. You might use the word "clean" while packing up the classroom. "Let's clean up our mess." You might also use it when pretending to clean a doll. "What should we clean first, the dolly's hands or the dolly's feet?" Or you could use it before cleaning hands before lunch. Let's clean our hands before we eat. The child will then learn the pattern that clean is a verb that can be used to describe washing something, and that it's usually followed by words that describe what you're cleaning. Also, the more that they hear this new word, the more comfortable that they'll feel when using it in the future. Okay, so we've talked about some language strategies. Now let's get to speech strategies. A little reminder, speech is defined as the sounds that we make that build up the words that we say. Some children have difficulty in making the correct sounds to build up a word. Something that you can do to support this in an early childhood setting is called auditory bombardment. Auditory bombardment is using a word or a sound over and over again during an activity and throughout the day. We can use it for children who have speech difficulty or grammatical difficulty because hearing words over and over is very important for learning new words and how they sound. The goal is that after hearing a word many times in many different activities, they'll start to use it on their own. You can use auditory bombardment with a child at any age. It can also be used during almost any activity or routine during the day. The more often you use it throughout the day, the better. So how do we do it? First, pick a word to practice. This could be one you've just heard the child use incorrectly. Then, think of different ways you could use it. And then talk. Use the word as many times as you can during your activity. So for example, a child says, "Look, a tat." You will pick the word cat as I've said this incorrectly. Then you can use the words as many times as you can. "You're right, that is a cat. That cat looks lovely and soft. I love cats. Cats are my favourite animal. I had a cat when I was little. Do you like cats?" Now let's talk about literacy. A child's journey towards literacy begins at birth, although it may be several years before they're actually ready to read and write. When infants and toddlers scribble with crayons or play with their books by lifting the flaps or pointing to pictures, they're already building emergent literacy skills. As professionals who work with young children, there are lots of things we can do to support these early skills that pave the way to later literacy success. Emergent literacy can be divided into two sets of skills: meaning-related skills and code-related skills. Meaning-related skills have to do with understanding what's being described in the book, and code-related skills are the skills that will help children understand that the squiggly lines that they see on the page are actually letters and words that have meaning. There are some things that we can do to support both meaning-related skills and code-related skills. We'll go through a few different strategies for each. Book sharing is a really effective way to support these skills because it allows for asking questions, making comments, and taking turns. But just reading isn't enough. It should be accompanied by a few tips to get the most out of the interaction. Let's go through some tips for both meaning-related skills and code-related skills. The first one is commenting. The adult notices what the child is interested in on the page, makes a comment, and waits for a child to respond. For example, a child points to a picture of a dog, and the adult says, "Oh, our dog looks just like that one." The next one is asking questions. The adult asks a question at the child's language level about what the child has shown an interest in on the page. For example, the child looks at a picture of a dog and says, "Dog." The adult says, "What should we call that dog?" Or if a character comes across a problem in the story, you could say, "Oh, what do you think he should do?" Next is responding by adding a little more. After the child talks, the adult adds on to what the child has said, then waits for the child to take a turn. For example, the child says, "Go on bus," and the adult says, "Yes, they're getting on the bus. They're ready for school." Another strategy is giving time to respond. Adults consistently use expectant waiting before giving another remark, allowing the child an opportunity to take a turn. The last one is making language visible. Use props and pictures and gestures when reading books. For example, using a bear puppet for the Going on a Bear Hunt book, and motioning the bear ducking to describe the word under, or the bear jumping to describe the word over. Now let's look at some code-related skills. First is print knowledge, which is just another word for knowledge about written words. Children need to learn a lot about how printed words work before they're able to read on their own later. For example, they need to understand that print is meaningful, print is different from the pictures, print goes from left to right, and that print consists of words that are made up of letters in the alphabet. In reading time, you could encourage children turning pages, children pointing to things on the page, gliding your finger across the page from left to right to show that you are reading words on the page and that what you're saying is related to these squiggles on the page, and also encouraging children to scribble with crayons and pretend to write. Next is alphabet knowledge. Children need to recognise the letters of the alphabet in order to read and write. In an early learning centre, an introduction to these future skills could be starting to sing the alphabet song, pointing out letters in your environment, for example, the McDonald's logo as the big M, or making letters out of Play-Doh. Another skill is sound awareness. Although knowing the alphabet is important, children also need to understand that letters correspond to certain sounds in order to be able to sound out words and spell. This means that children must first realise that the speech that they hear can be broken down into individual sounds. Children start to build sound awareness when they listen to speech and songs, and when they start to enjoy or copy silly sounds, rhyming words, or words that start with the same sounds. Things that you could do to encourage sound awareness is singing nursery rhymes and rhyming songs, imitating silly sounds, such as the snake makes a s sound. Can you make the s sound? Or using words that start with the same sounds for fun, like Frank the funny farmer, Charlie the cheeky chimpanzee, Oscar the orange octopus. While there are many strategies that you can use to try and support language and make your early learning centres a language-rich environment, some children will still need specialist one-on-one support and may need to see a speech pathologist. Speech Pathology Australia has a document which shows us the red flags for communication development. If you notice a child who falls under any one of these categories, please let your director know and encourage a referral for a speech pathologist so that they can have more direct one-on-one support. This document will be provided to you as part of this education package so that you can confidently identify a child who might need specialist support and talk to your director about it, who can then refer the child to speech pathology team at Kingaroy Hospital. I hope that this video has been useful and that you've taken away some tips from today. Today we've talked about what communication is and why it's important, what typical speech and language development looks like, what can happen when a child has difficulty with speech and language, strategies for supporting language in the early childhood setting, strategies for supporting language whilst reading books, strategies to support speech difficulties, and when to refer a child to your director if you suspect they're having some difficulties. Thank you for your time.